So good morning and welcome to this communication skills webinar, which is Cambridge Marketing College's webinar series. This is actually series 2. You might have been part of series 1, which we ran earlier in the year. This is now series 2, and they are growing great guns. We've been sort of doing a whole host of different topics to empower marketers, business owners and communicators with hopefully different ways of thinking about a whole range of different skills and approaches to running and being part of a successful business. And obviously at this point in time, we're going through lots of changes. There's lots of chaos out there in the marketplaces that we serve, as well as probably inside our own organizations. So one of the hot topics right now is effective communication. And so that's really the purpose of this particular webinar, which is to talk about communication skills and just really give you some ideas about things that you can go away and test and play with. I am a communicator, it's kind of what I do, but I'm not going to say that I know all the answers, because I think for everybody on this planet, if you are human, you are going to be on a journey of communication. So there is no definitive answer. There's no perfect suite of skills that you can create and then actually use to make yourself a 100% definitive communicator. It simply doesn't exist. So what we're on is an ongoing journey of discovery. So what I'm going to do as we go through this session is talk to you a little bit about some of the things that maybe you can focus on, maybe have a little play with, maybe test out, see people's reactions, see how it feels for you doing some of these things. And it will be really interesting to get your feedback on the other side of this, maybe in a future webinar, or you can direct message us here at the college, or direct message me directly, personally, and yeah, just kind of tell us how it went. So I'm Neil Wilkins. I'm one of the college tutors and a fellow of the college, and I'm the host of this webinar series, which I'm doing in line with Lauren from the college. And Lauren's going to look after the chat facility as we go through this particular webinar, because we're going to do a Q&A at the end of my little presentation here. And so if you have any burning questions about communication or communication skills within business and within marketing, then fire away and add those to the chat section, which you'll see in the menu button here on your webinar page. So I said that this particular webinar, this communication skills one, is part of a webinar series. We're going to be following this one up in a couple of weeks' time with one specifically about presentation skills. So there's a bit of a crossover here. So some of the time when we're talking about communication, we are looking at presenting information and content and ideas to others, be it customers or peers or our management. Now, of course, communication comes into that. So these two things are quite intrinsically linked, but we're going to do a deeper dive into specifically presentation skills in the next one. And then in early July, on the 9th of July, we're going to look at the art of persuasion. So we're going to look at some of the subtleties about influencing people in a way that doesn't necessarily control their behavior as such, because of course that would be sort of seen as a little bit manipulative, but actually persuades people to do things that are in everybody's best interest. So we'll look at some of the skills and things that you can do there to persuade people. And of course that ticks the boxes of engagement with all stakeholders, from customers through to colleagues. And then in the 23rd of July webinar, we're going to look at negotiation. So negotiation skills, which again are a subtle kind of win-win end game focused set of skills, which again build on the communication skills, a lot of those that we're going to be covering in this session. So we've got as I say, a series here that kind of builds each time. So it would be great to see you on each of these webinars. And as I say, at the end of this particular one, we're going to have a Q&A. So anything that kind of sort of stands out to you or challenges you, or maybe you're just looking for a little bit of clarity around a particular point, I will do my best to answer it. Obviously, if we need to come back to you because you might need some further support, then we can do that as well. So there's a lot of flexibility in here. But what I want to do at the start of this is to really kind of set the scene, if you like, in terms of really what we mean by communication and actually what that actually does for us and the world around us. Well, I'm a huge advocate of the concept of you get what you give. So communication, to me, at its most basic sense and its most kind of sort of natural state, as it were, is a conversation. Okay, so that to me is that this is communication with others, with other human beings, and it isn't one way. So this shouldn't be, when you think of the word communication, it shouldn't be a monologue. It shouldn't be a one-way flow of energy and information and content and ideas. It is all about collaboration. And what I always think, actually, when I think about communication, and of course within marketing and sales and business development in organizations, communication is absolutely at the heart of everything that we do. And I always like to think of this phrase. It's been often overused, but I still think it's really pertinent when it comes to the purity and the relevance of communication. This phrase of continuous improvement. I said right at the outset, we're all on a journey here. We're all looking to do things and hopefully continuously improve ourselves and the world around us. I love the quote that if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always had. In other words, unless you're willing to change, unless you're willing to embrace a change process and to think of, ongoing learning and development at a personal level, you're not really going to see much changing and much happening. So the more you put into this, the more you explore some of these ideas and the concepts that we're going to be talking through, the more you will see something return to you. And of course, if you put goodness out there into the world in your communication, you're going to get goodness back. If you put out positivity, you'll get positivity back. The flip side also applies. So if you spend your time communicating in a way that kind of draws people down, it saps their energy, and you kind of take that sort of almost victim mentality, that is what you'll get returned to you. This is a very, very simple equation here. It's the law of physics, the law of energy transfer. You will get back what you put out. So if we begin with that as the kind of the starting point, then it starts to get really quite interesting. Because what it allows us to do is to kind of, as I say, take a little bit of ownership over this whole idea that what we're doing is seeing something in a sense that we can actually, not say manipulate, but we can actually control, we can take accountability for, we can do something with. So as we go through this, I want to share with you 20 different ways. I'm going to literally have one slide, one statement for each of these 20. So we're going to go through these pretty quickly, but these are 20 ways to consider improving your communication. Now, you might decide as you go through this that some of these things are things that you do really well already, that you're very comfortable with the returns that you get back from others when you communicate with these certain skills or certain tools. And that's great, absolutely brilliant. But hopefully there'll be maybe one or two in here and you think, I'm curious about that. I actually want to take that into the real world. I want to share that with a friend, or I want to communicate like that with my partner, or I'm going to select a work colleague, and that next Zoom call that we have, I'm going to try some of these things out. Because that's the way to develop communication skills. You can't learn this stuff from a textbook. You can't learn it from a webinar. You've got to take away these little kind of moments of hopefully inspiration and sort of think, I'm going to see if I can go and break that, because I either don't agree with it or there's something intriguing in that concept or that idea. I'm going to go away and see how it might work for me. Or not, because the more you try this stuff, the more you will kind of figure out that there is this kind of almost suite of things that you can use that are really relevant to you in the situation that you're in, but it might be very, very different for the person you're sat next to, or your partner, or your friend. So this is a very personal way of communicating. This is a very personal way to kind of share stuff with the world. Okay, so let's begin then. I'm going to sort of, as I say, run through these pretty quickly because there's a lot of stuff in here. So the first thing I'm going to cover is the medium of choice. So when we talk about communication now, we are on this other side of the various restrictions that we've all been facing over the last 18 months, seeing a range of different media that we can use to communicate through. And we're almost balancing these out. It used to be a lot of face-to-face stuff, but of course that's been replaced with video conferencing. We used to pick up the phone a lot. I can remember times when we wouldn't even have a computer and we would actually just physically pick up a phone and dial somebody and talk to them. We obviously have constantly, all of us, been using email to communicate. And of course, now we have social interaction through our intranets, through social media with customers. All of this stuff is a big blend of choice, if you like, in terms of the most appropriate communication method. Okay, so all of the stuff we're going to cover here will apply to each and every one of these tools: face-to-face, phone, email, social, video, and also within ourselves. What we find is that, and I'm sure you'll be sort of like me with this, is that we have a chattering mind at times where, we're trying to go off and do one thing, but our mind is chattering away to us in the background, trying to get us to do something else or trying to distract us. So communication is not just an external thing, it's also an internal thing. And we're going to cover sort of some things that you can do about that as we go through this. But the medium of choice is super important, because the very first thing you might want to do is actually think of the other person's perspective. If your preference is face-to-face, but the other person likes the phone, or if your preference is to craft a beautifully, beautifully constructed email, but they would rather have a video call with you, it's a choice. You can choose to do it on your terms, or you can choose to do it on the terms of the person you're communicating with. Now, I'm not going to say one is right or one is wrong, but it's a conscious choice. So think actively. Do I want to do this on my terms, or do I want to do this for the benefit, and it probably is for the benefit of the other person? Do it on their terms. And if I ask them what their preference is, maybe that could be a preferred medium. Now, it might be a blend. You might say, actually, part of the communication is one way, part of it is the other. And again, this is just about making conscious choice. So the very first thing I would suggest to you is that think about the media that you prefer, and think about the media that the people you're engaging with prefer. Is there a crossover here? Are you meeting on a common ground? And if you're not, make a conscious choice as to which one you're going with, because it's a really important thing that you're actually working off a sort of a common understanding or a common ground. Second thing I want you to think about here is communicating with confidence. Okay, we can easily get confidence. Some people, and maybe this applies to you, are kind of maybe right now, for a whole host of reasons, maybe either lacking in confidence, or you'd like your confidence level to kind of be improved, however you want to define that. Now, there's some very, very simple little techniques that you can use to gain the confidence when you communicate. Okay, if you don't naturally see yourself as a strong communicator, one of the key things you can do is plan in advance. Okay, if you can figure out what the desired outcome is of this communication, this conversation, this video call, this face-to-face, this awkward moment where you have to address a particular topic with your line manager, whatever it happens to be, if you can aim for a desired outcome and plan that desired outcome in advance, maybe plot out, maybe make a few little notes. This sounds like really obvious stuff to do, but you'd be amazed how many people just jump straight in to a communication situation without actually figuring out what a desired outcome is. In other words, on the other side of this time I'm going to spend with this person, what do I want to have achieved? What do I want them to understand? What do I want to feel as a result of this? To actually create that desired outcome, because that in itself begins to attract the right level of communication and the right kind of tone of voice, which we'll talk about in a minute. Being a specialist rather than an expert can give you a huge amount of confidence. If people sort of look to you as being a bit of an expert on a topic, it's actually quite a hard pedestal to live up to. So you don't want to be up on that pedestal. So maybe position yourself to build your confidence as being maybe a specialist in something rather than this glorified expert on a topic. Again, it levels that expectation on you and maybe gives you that little bit of confidence to think, well, actually, yeah, I do specialize in that subject. So yeah, maybe I could actually achieve that. And remember, nobody is perfect. One of the biggest blockers to confident communication is when people actually overplay how others might view them. And they're looking for this level of perfection. The people you are presenting to in a presentation, and as I say, we'll do the presentation skills in the next webinar. But just as an example, if you're presenting to a room full of people, do not stand there or sit there or be on screen in front of them and thinking, oh my gosh, they're looking to me as an expert here and they all know more than I do. They don't. We talk ourselves out of these situations and it can knock our confidence. Know that nobody is perfect. And nobody's looking at perfection from you. They're looking for value from you, but they're not looking for perfection. And 80% is always enough. Huge fan of the Pareto principle. Look it up if you haven't read about it. It's a fascinating philosophy. The 80-20 rule. 80% is always enough to communicate with confidence. So maybe a few little moments there, a few little ideas in there that might actually help you in the way that you're thinking. So the next thing I want to think about here is number 3 is active listening. Now, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I'm a great listener. And then you see them drifting off and their mind and their eyes are going off to somewhere else and they're thinking about the shopping list or they're thinking about what they're going to watch on Netflix tonight. We all do it. We all do it. Even a good listener, and I would actually say I'm probably a better listener than I am actually a communicator in terms of a presenter. It's kind of just how I'm made. And you'll be on a spectrum as well in terms of active listening, but we can all do better. Okay, so there's 2 things we can do to actually prove to ourselves and give evidence to ourselves that we're actively listening. One way I like to think about this is to be able to replay and summarize what the person has just told me. In other words, not just to say, yeah, I listened to you, and then you're on to your kind of part in the conversation, but to actually replay to them by saying, what I think I heard you say was, and replay it, just to give them the opportunity to come back and say, oh, well, yeah, that bit, yeah, okay, but this bit, this is actually what I meant. And so it gives you that opportunity to kind of trade on the communication, and that's fine. It allows you to clarify, it allows you to be very, very clear with the other person just how much you did listen and how much you kind of played back to them. And if you find that this is a hard thing to do because you're chomping at the bit to be able to then say your piece, and particularly this comes in sort of conflict situations or in annual reviews or, you know, those more sensitive moments where actually we've got all the stuff that we want to say, we want to get that out there, and actually we find ourselves, oh, I didn't really actually listen to anything you said because I was only concentrating on what I want to say. One of the tricks that I use is listening as though you need to teach somebody else. Okay, this is a very, very simple but such a powerful little tool or little skill that you might want to sort of have a little play with and try and develop, is when you're listening to somebody, particularly if it's something technical, something that's going to be important for performing a particular role, or it's something that you're going to need to pass on to others because you need to brief somebody else on it, or it's part of a project and you're kind of learning the background of the project. Think in your mind, okay, before I listen, I'm going to need to teach, and maybe it's a real person you have in the back of your mind, I'm going to need to teach them everything that I hear now. Now, you'll be amazed how that switches on certain areas of the brain, and your subconscious will pay so much more attention to that moment and actually actively listen if you think you're going to have to teach somebody else what you're about to hear. It is such a powerful little tool. So I'd recommend you have a little play with that, because that one for me is a really key one. If I find my mind drifting, and I do, and I'm sure we all do, then that's a really great little one to play with and to have a little go with. So see if you can teach somebody what you've just heard. Now, of course, how this is going to come across to the other person is there's going to be some sort of empathy building here. And empathy is very much about kind of the feeling side of your communication. If you're very much a thinking person, you think of yourself as somebody who kind of thinks a lot, not necessarily a feeling kind of person, you're not that bothered about how the other person feels, you just want to get your message across, then what I'd encourage you to do is have a little play with the idea of listening and responding with your heart rather than your mind. In other words, actually go into just noticing the subtleties of how the other person, when they're talking to you, is kind of giving out their energy. Are they making eye contact with you? Are they a little bit nervous? Are they a little bit twitchy? Are their hands shaking? Are they kind of looking away, not wishing to really properly engage as they talk to you? Kind of get into their shoes, step into their shoes and view yourself as though you're listening to them. And actually say, if you're replying back to the person, and this is how empathy kind of evolves and actually how empathy is actually physically delivered, is if you say, do you know, I feel, and then say it, rather than, well, I think, because that is actually engaging your heart rather than your mind. And it's a really important difference Empathy can't be a thought through process. Empathy is actually how you're feeling towards the other person. And of course, if we get what we give, we're going to get that return to us. So it's going to be a much more intimate style of communication. And we can do this with everybody. We can do this with customers. We can do this with peers and colleagues. We can do this with family and friends. Play around with this whole idea of I feel rather than I think, because that in itself is going to set up quite a different kind of dynamic, if you like. Now, number 5 is respect and diplomacy in communications. I mentioned there a little bit about this whole idea of getting into maybe a slightly more tense, slightly more conflict situation. Now, there can be moments when, you really want to bite back because somebody has maybe attacked you verbally. Maybe somebody has said something which you really vehemently disagree with and you want your chance to come back at them. Respect and diplomacy from the other person's perspective is super important if we're going to be building this empathy. And what I always encourage people to do, some people say, oh, no, you need to bite your tongue in that situation. Well, that's not a particularly pleasant thing to do, is it? Biting your tongue is a very British phrase, that one. So I would always say enforce a moment of reflection. And that just means just pause for a moment. And a moment can be a fraction of a second. It can be a second. It can also be an intake of breath. It can be just that moment of calm before you respond. And that in itself will create a respectful moment, and it will allow you to be more diplomatic with your response back. Okay, people say, oh no, breathe deeply, take a moment out and stuff. I'm just talking about a moment to reflect. Yes, you might want to come back and bite straight away back, but imagine if your response is going to be quoted in national media. So you're going to see yourself on the bbc.co.uk homepage. This response is going to go out to the world. If you can just reflect on that, and if you've ever had media training, this is one of the things that I'll bring into the media training. They'll say, take that time and know that the world is going to hear this response. How does that make you feel? How's that going to make you look? How does that make you sound? So you'll come back in a much more reflective way. It'll probably be a lot more balanced. It'll be probably a lot more useful to the interaction that you're having. So respect and diplomacy comes from allowing yourself the time to reflect on how you're going to respond. And if you need to take multiple time, that's fine. Because number 6 for me is proactively using silence. I love silence. I play with silence. Actually, I even play, if you've been on any of my sort of workshops or webinars, I play with silence actually in the Q&A session. I'm happy to just sit there in silence. It's probably the introvert bit of me coming through here. But a lot of people are very uncomfortable with silence. They want to fill it. And of course, as soon as you fill it, you lose that little moment where you might have established a deeper connection, where you might have inspired somebody to come back with something that you've then overridden them because you didn't give them the chance or the space to come back with. And of course, if somebody else on the other side of your communication is a reflector, they need that silence, they need that time to get their thoughts and feelings aligned. So proactively using silence, if you see somebody who takes time to come back with a considered response, and that is their preferred method of communication, proactively use silence. It's the reason why I've got nothing on this slide. It's the reason why there is nothing within silence. It's that beautiful moment of reflection that the two of you or the group of you can do this in a wider setting as a big group. Using silence is powerful. We'll talk about the use of silence next time in presentation, because the use of silence, there are some absolute genius presenters on this planet, and they all have a common thing, and that is that they use the pause to enforce points, to make a statement, to give the audience just a chance to reflect on what they've said. So the power of silence in communication is, well, it just can't be understated. And of course, aligned with that moment is the fact that, you're now confidently communicating. You're going to be giving off this kind of essence of, wow, I'm getting a really good experience as either the listener or the audience or the other person on the other side of your communication. And of course, what comes into this is the art of body language. So number 7.7 for me is is body language. Now, this is a really interesting one, because just don't move. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, right here, right now, just freeze, okay? Notice how you're sitting. If you are sitting, if you're standing, notice how you're standing. But just notice what that says. So the position of your body right here, right now, if your arms are folded, if you're multitasking, whatever it is you're doing, what does that say about your attention and interest to the words that I'm talking and to the things that you're seeing on screen? It's not so much about correcting that and saying, oh, okay, I have to sit up really straight and I have to make complete eye contact. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying here is just being very, very conscious, very, very present about how you want others to perceive you. Because you are giving out body language, you are conveying messages at every moment of interaction when you communicate. And the vast majority of actually what you're communicating isn't the words, because people, as we know, don't actively listen. So therefore, they're picking up subtle cues, subtle little messages from you that are going on behind the scenes. So it's super important to maybe just check in with yourself and practice this. Practice this even when you're not communicating. Think, how am I sitting? How am I looking? How am I dressed? You know, how do I come across to other people? And particularly, of course, when you're on a video call. Body language applies to the video call. Yes, it tends to be from the neck upwards in terms of the messaging, but you see a lot of eye movement, you see eye shifting, you know, people are multitasking, they're not focused in on what you're saying, they're doing other things. You know, we leak a lot of energy cues. And of course, that will impact on the storytelling you're doing and the quality of the engagement with that other person. So just being aware of you. And of course, there's a whole topic around being aware of other people so that you can then adapt what you're doing and saying in line with kind of the responses you're getting. And the big one for all of us really is the importance of eye contact. So number 8 for me in this top 20 things of communication skills is being really conscious of eye contact. A couple of really nice little quotes as I was looking through, trying to sort of come up with some stuff to share with you. And I thought these 2 quotes are really, really strong. Meaningful eye contact has the power to transcend time and space, to connect us with others, and can be one of the most gracious and important ways to demonstrate attention and respect. When people don't make any eye contact with you, how does that make you feel? If you're trying to convey a really important point and somebody is not willing to balance, and it doesn't mean you're completely fixated on them face to face, eye to eye all the time. There is a balance, a natural balance and a flow to strike. But if they're not making any eye contact with you, what does that say to you? So just being very conscious not to overdo it, because the second quote is that having eye contact for more than 6 seconds without looking away or blinking reveals a desire for either sex or murder. Okay, slightly overstated, but you get the point. It's really important not to think of all of these little skills and all of these little tools when you're practicing them, particularly if you've not really thought about some of this stuff before. Don't overplay it. Subtlety is everything in communication. It is just tuning what you do, playing with some of these tools and ideas, and seeing what happens, seeing if you get a response that you like, seeing if you get a response that's useful. So balancing eye contact, not just maintaining a fixed stare, probably isn't going to give the right message if that quote is to be believed. So be careful. Point number 9, being clear and concise. This is really important in communication. We overdo it. You know, some of us are storytellers, some of us aren't. Some of us like to chat on and hear the sound of our own voice. Some of us don't. But less is definitely more. And I'd like you to have a little play with this word concision. Concision is a really interesting little word, and I want you to play with concision. Concision is all about being concise. Can you trim down everything you want to say into fewer words? Because if you communicate with fewer words, you use the reflection points of silence. If you do it through a medium of mutual agreement or of choice on one side or the other, the use of concision, being really clear and concise with the preset that less is more, you can have Very, very effective conversations. Now, this doesn't mean you're going to talk in bullet points, and there isn't something a little bit softer, and you're not going to warm up the conversation and cool down the conversation and, have that narrative that we all love as human beings. But just think about, when I need to get my clear key message across, how am I going to do it in fewer words? I love the story, the little fable of the three little pigs. Remember that one? One little pig has the straw house, one little pig has the wooden house, and the wolf can't blow the house down is the house made of bricks. It's about the foundations. Knowing in advance of the communication, the meeting, the presentation, the Zoom call, what your goal is, and building the foundations of that conversation, that communication, that presentation on some solid, clear and concise foundations allows you to have a house that's still standing at the end of the communication. If you just jump straight in there with 1,000 points to make, good luck with that. It is not going to work. People like concision. So just look up that word and have a little play, because it's a really interesting word to play with. Point number 10, we're halfway there. Point number 10 is open-mindedness. Most of us are very, very set in our ways and our views. We like the predictability of knowing where we stand, knowing where we sit, knowing our views and holding on to them, probably at the expense of most of the growth that we could otherwise experience. So good, effective communication brings into play the concept of open-mindedness. Now, what does that mean? Well, it could be that you can view every single encounter as an opportunity to experience and learn something new. If you go into a Zoom call thinking, okay, I'm feeling a bit down about this call, it's one of those regular meetings, it's one of those things I just, got that sinking feeling about this call. Think, okay, so this is an opportunity, but what is it that I can actually experience and learn from this? Maybe I can put some questions into this meeting, which is a typical kind of meeting that we have the same old stuff every time, but I want to learn something new. So maybe I'm going to seed a question in here, or maybe I'm going to do something slightly differently. Maybe it's even just a subtle piece of body language or eye contact, and just play with it. So being open-minded to encounters is really, really important. And of course, what we're talking about here is about being very present and aware. This has been a constant theme here. It's about being awake in your communication, not just thinking, oh, it's the same person, we're talking about the same subject, so I'm going to get the same outcome because nothing changes. It doesn't have to be like that. So think about being present and aware. Number 11, engaging, not preaching. Now, you are in effect marketing and selling to this other person, even though you might not be actually marketing. The whole kind of philosophy behind marketing is that it's customer or audience focused. So how much can you make this communication about them rather than you? Yes, you want that outcome that you've set in advance. You want that desired outcome, but it needs to be a win-win. Even if you have to tell somebody to do something, or you're presenting something that everybody else has to learn, think of it from their perspective. How is that going to come across? So let's think about engagement. Let's think about opening up the Q&A, opening up the chat facility, as it were, rather than just presenting, because that in itself then becomes more of a conversation. People tire of being preached to. People don't want to be sold to. They want to be given the reasons to buy, because it's all based around value. So think about how you can do that with them. Next thing is about keeping it simple. A lot of the time when we communicate around the what, the when, the how, the who, all those kind of more practical details, whereas actually what humans want in communication is the why. So if you have to lead in a conversation, in a subject, in a presentation, maybe you're hosting a meeting, hosting a Zoom call, if you can make that all about the why are we here? Why are we getting together? Why is this an important topic? Why do I need your buy-in? The buy is the human-centric nature of communication. So keeping it as simple as just focusing on the why, the who, the what, the when, that's just going to fall out as a result of getting the why right. People love the why. It is part of negotiation. It is part of presentation. It is part of the art of influence, and we will explore this in future webinars. But right here, right now, remember when you communicate, it's the why. Why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why is this other person needing to engage with me? Explore that rather than the fine details, Because of course, again, think about marketing. It's not about the features and benefits, it's about the outcomes. That's why people engage with your brand and your products and services. They don't do it because you've got more features than the competition. They do it because of value. And the value comes from the why that they're going to get. And of course, that brings in point number 13, which is conversational feedback. What we're looking for here is rapport. Okay, and that comes from consistently and constantly being in a feedback loop. So much as I'm not doing here, because I am just presenting to you, but we'll open up the chat in a moment, is think about your communication as a conversational feedback loop. In other words, constantly thinking about being really physically connected to the people you're communicating with. And even imagining, that there's a physical visible cable connecting the two of you, or you with the room of people. In other words, you've got to really think about this as a pure connection. That's where this feedback loop comes from. So it isn't just about, hey, me and my words, and I'm putting them out to you, please listen. It's much more about, oh, I'm giving you this. What do you think? Give me some feedback on this. And actually inviting the conversation. That's super important at that stage. And of course, we can only do that using point number 14, which is staying present. Exploring the concept of right here, right now. And what I really encourage you to do, because we can all do this better, me included, absolutely me included, keeping alert to what's called your monkey mind. If you've ever done any mindfulness or meditation or any kind of study on that topic, you will know there's a phrase called the monkey mind, that chattering little monkey on your shoulder who's constantly trying to distract you. So you're listening intently to this person, and then you realize a few moments later, oh, my mind has just drifted. There's your monkey mind, because your mind is now talking about something else somewhere else. So see today, maybe this could be your thing for the afternoon now, or whenever you're listening to this, for the rest of today. Think about staying present by exploring the concept of the right here, right now. Notice where you are, the physicality of your surroundings. Notice the fine little details of the person you're communicating with, be it on the screen or in person. Really be alert to, oh, my mind's drifting, right, back on track, listen to them. Remember, I can teach what they're telling me to somebody else. That will bring you straight back on track. Keep alert to that monkey mind. It's one of the big inhibitors to effective communication. So it's a really important one to stay in touch with. And of course, remembering that as you build on this idea that everything, point 15, is face-to-face. Humans will benefit from visual cues even when they aren't together. This is why when we've got video conferencing, if you can't have a camera on, we've got the little thumbnail image of the person. That's not there by accident. This is human interaction. That's why we have those little thumbnail images. And of course, even if we don't do that, so if we're on the phone or something where it's, it's very difficult to kind of have that visual sort of cue, if you like, help others to picture you when it's not face-to-face by using carefully your tone of voice and energy level. Okay, now I don't normally talk like this, and when I'm doing a webinar, I will raise the pace of the speed that I talk. I'll raise my energy. I'm sitting differently in my seat than I would if I was having a one-to-one conversation with you. It's just a natural thing that I would want to do, and you'd probably be doing the same. It's allowing you, hopefully, to take a little bit more energy than you normally get from me, because you can't see me face-to-face. You're either listening to this on the podcast or you're looking at this on the screen. So you can't see me. So I have to, by the tone of my voice and my energy level, convey my enthusiasm for these top 20 points, because everything is face-to-face. So if you physically can't see my face, my tone of voice is going to give you that feedback that you need to stay engaged. And the reason I will do that as part of my set of communication skills, good or bad, however you see them, is that number 16 in my list of 20 is that really what I'm trying to do here is market to my audience. And that's you individually. Because in marketing, obviously, we always talk about putting the customer first. And in effective communication, it's exactly the same. So when you think about who you're communicating with, as I say, it could be a family, friend, partner, colleague, peer, line manager, stakeholder, customer, it doesn't matter who this is, but consider them as a customer persona that you would do marketing to. And of course, each individual customer persona that you have in your organization, in your business, They're all very different. They want different things from you. Well, so do the people you're communicating with. So think about marketing to them with your communication. So do it in the channel that makes sense to them. I did say it was a choice, but if you're thinking, not really sure which one to do, think about what's in it for them, because that will put them at rest. That will make them very comfortable. Then you stand a chance of getting your message across. You can also then obviously be thinking about the messages, and it is, of course, different messages for different people. So the pure marketing nature of marketing communications comes into personal communication. We often just think of these things as two quite dispersed things, but they're not. They're all part of point 17, which is about creating the right atmosphere. Thinking ahead to the appropriateness of your message, the appropriateness of the medium, the appropriateness of your tone of voice, and setting the scene, setting the scenario, creating the right atmosphere. If this was me doing a guided meditation for you, I wouldn't be speaking at this pace. My tone of voice would be a lot deeper as well. And it is okay to be tough when you communicate as well as friendly. A lot of the stuff we talked about so far is all about building empathy, being kind, being generous, thinking of the other person's stuff, but you can also use communication to be tough as well. And that is about creating the right atmosphere. Being assertive and clear in your communication is as important as being friendly and warm and showing empathy. And choose your words carefully as you set the right atmosphere. Think about your choice of words, because all of these things will affect the communication style and enjoyment that you have. And just a little simple example is I hear a lot of people calling their line manager, for example, their boss. Wouldn't it be nicer if that person was actually their leader? Because just think of those two words, boss and leader. If you've got a boss, it's somebody who's going to boss you and tell you what to do, whereas a leader is going to inspire you, is going to take you either by the hand or guide you to a better place. It's the same person doing the same role, but the tone of voice, creating the right atmosphere, gives you a certain feeling which will set the level of communication. So you can do this as much as other people are doing this to you. So carefully thinking about choreographing that, and then using the tone of voice and style. And of course, as we've said already, it isn't necessarily what you say, it's the way that you say it. 80% of the impact, point 18, 80% of the impact of a message comes from how it's presented. And by doing a number of these things, of course, this is 20 big things that you're going to have to be thinking about. Select a few, play with them, and think of how you present yourself, how you present your communication, your content, your tone of voice and style, because these things make a huge difference. 80-20 rule coming into play there. Point number 19, we're almost there, is managing and respecting time. If you need to keep it short, okay, we've talked about being clear and concise. If you need to keep something short, set an expectation at the outset that you are respecting this other person's time. Do mid-conversation time checks. In other words, if you've got a short meeting, make sure you keep it on track by just reminding people that this is where we are in the process, this is when we're going to end it, and this is the win-win objective, desired outcome that's going to be a good thing for all of us. Thank them as well. Managing and respecting people's time. Time is the only thing you can't buy. Time is the only thing that once it's gone, it's gone. So managing and respecting one of the most important assets that a human being has, their time, is a really fundamental thing to be building this empathy. People know that it's worth communicating with you, sharing time with you, because you respect them and their time, and you manage the time that you spend with them. And you say to them, look, I don't want to keep you longer than we need to. Thank you so much for your time. Again, building that empathy, building that relationship and those connections that you need to making this thing work. And ultimately, point 20, the thing that we're really all after here is a win-win conclusion. Every moment that you spend at that time, every communication scenario is all about collaboration. You can't really, well, you can communicate with yourself, but most of the time we're communicating with others. Okay, so being transparent about your ideal outcomes is the best way to create those desired endpoints, if you like, those win-win conclusions. Set them at the start. Say what it is you want to get. That's why I said about, if you've got a question that's a burning question on this topic, use the chat facility. It was inviting you to collaborate with me here in terms of exploring some ideas. So being very transparent about the importance of that at the outset is a really important thing to do. So those are my top 20 things that I would recommend that you do. And to round those up, really, that in terms of communication skills, everything, absolutely everything that you're going to encounter in your life going forward, including how well you communicate from this point onwards, is a consequence of the decisions that you have just made, or the decisions that you made earlier. Everything is a consequence of the decisions that you made earlier. So you can choose to think, oh, okay, that was all right. Yeah, I'm just going to now happily carry on with my day. Or you can say, nah, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to choose 2 or 3 of those things. I'm actually going to go away and play with those, because those could be consequences that may surprise you, may excite you, and may give you communication at a level that you've not actually been able to play with before. And let me know how it goes, because these things are super important as we grow as individuals and grow our businesses. So there we go. So I'm going to open up the chat facility. I'm going to invite Lauren to come back on now and let me know if there are any questions. Just while Lauren does that, just to remind you that the next one is kind of building on this communication skills idea and actually coming to the concept of presentation skills. So kind of how you take that into a presentation scenario. So on the 25th of June, you can join me for that one. Really looking forward to that one. And the marketingcollege.com/events is the place that you go to register. You do need to pre-register for each of these webinars, just so that we can obviously give you the login details in advance. The other thing as well, I'm just waiting for any questions that are coming through here, is that let's connect. You can find me on any social platform at Neil Wilkins X, and we have 2 podcasts which cover these kinds of topics. So if you have enjoyed this particular session and the others that we're going to be running and have run, feel free to subscribe to the Cambridge Marketing Podcast and also my podcast, that's the Neil Wilkins Podcast, because these are hot topics right now, and these are things that all marketers and all business owners and entrepreneurs and decision makers are really focusing on. That's why we're talking about them a lot. So it'd be great to sort of see you on there. And if you've got any topics that you think we should be covering, or anything that you'd like to see us running any podcasts or webinars on, feel free to direct message me or the college, and we will hopefully be able to incorporate those into the program. But as I say, the next one that we have for you is on the 25th of June, and that is presentation skills.
Right.
So Lauren, do we have any questions?
Yeah, sure. So I've got one that's come in, and I think it's a really good question. So Christine asks, any special tips for communicating with difficult and stubborn stakeholders?
Wow, nice question. I think it really has to come back to that word empathy. I think the reason that they're being stubborn probably has nothing at all to do with you. Okay, so I think we're going to go slightly off-piste with the answer here, because I think this is a bigger thing than just purely communication. The communication then is kind of how you deal with it. I think what we're doing here is we're going to try and look at the why. Why is that person, that stakeholder, stubborn? Why is it that they're resistant? Why is it that they're reluctant to communicate or to meet with you? The chances are it's nothing to do with you, and the chances are it's more, if not solely, to do with them and their baggage, some people call it their weather, their internal weather. If you can take the time, and if you have the desire to spend the time to try and figure out, maybe you ask them, maybe you ask around. Obviously, you've got to do this in a subtle and authentic way, but maybe you ask the people who know them, this person, I'm sort of struggling, I'm having some challenges here. Is there anything I should know? Is there anything I could know that would help me to communicate with them? Find out more about what's going on. So because again, if you can get to the why, it allows you then to maybe go through all 20 of these points and say, okay, how can I align each of these elements with this person and the baggage that they're bringing to this communication? because the chances are, once you suggest to them that you're doing this on their terms, you're not giving in. This is still being kind of proactively assertive, but it's being empathic at the same time. So you're showing the empathy, but actually what you're doing is you're kind of meeting them on a stable ground for them, and they will undoubtedly open up more to you by doing that. Okay, so it's less about how you do the dealing and the communication with them, and much more about the why. Because as soon as you show that level of interest in them, well, again, if you were that person, what's not to like? So great question, really, really good question.
Yeah, I agree. That's all the questions that we've got so far. We've had some nice comments though, saying that it's been a fantastic session and thank you for your time, and that the session's been really useful. So,
Great.
oh, hang on. We've got another one. How can a female participant gain some ground or attention in a male-orientated or dominated environment?
Now this is a this is a very, very interesting one, and I've kind of played with this quite a bit as a question kind of over the years, because I'm a male in predominantly a female-centric industry, which is marketing. So there are way more females in marketing than there are males. So I've kind of seen it on the counter sort of side, if you like, sort of being a male in a female-dominated environment. And actually, some of the brands that I've worked with have been predominantly female-centric brands as well. So I kind of get it from the other side of things. But I think directly relating to the question goes back to that thinking and feeling thing. Okay, so you got a choice here that there is, and if you look at the research, it's not absolute this, but it is statistically significant that males, if you were to take a random sample of males, they're more likely to engage professionally using the word think than the word feel. Okay. If you're a female, you are more likely to engage with the word feel than the word think. So you've got a choice here then. If you are this female in a male-dominated industry or male-dominated organization, you've either got a choice of saying, well, okay, I'm going to actually play to that strength because I can go in with the empathy card. I can go in with the feeling card. And if this is you, then this is great. If you're more of a thinker as a female, then this bit obviously wouldn't apply, but I'm talking generically here. If you're a female who is willing to play, and I'll use that word, to play with the concept and idea of this feeling and thinking, maybe start to use this kind of this language and this terminology to see what subtle differences you get in terms of reaction from your male colleagues by using the word think rather than the word feel. It sounds, just until you've done this, until you've played with these two words, it sounds a little bit strange. It doesn't sound like, well, that's not going to make much difference, but it can make a profound difference to the style and the quality of the conversations and the communication you have. So I would say just playing with those words. Now, depending on you as an individual, if you are this woman in this male dominated environment, you will have a certain personal style as well. So I can't judge and say you're female, so you're going to say feel. You might not want to be doing that. But the point is, you can play with this. Okay, it's very, very subtle. People probably won't notice unless you kind of shout the word differently. You know, it's obviously got to be subtle with this, but just observe, be the observer over those subtle differences is what I'd say, because that is probably the most profound thing that you can start to play with. But it is difficult if you're finding it a challenge.
Great, thank you. We've got one last question. Rebecca asks, do you have any suggestions of communicating with people from different backgrounds, especially from different countries?
Yeah, this is a really, really interesting one. And I think it's about it comes back to that kind of respect and dignity. Different backgrounds, different cultures, very kind of much diversity, to use a currently sort of fashionable word, because diversity comes in all different shapes and sizes, obviously. I mean, I think certainly if you're working across sort of international boundaries, I was very fortunate in a role sort of quite some years ago to be the UK representative on a European sort of management team, and we used to sort of go around to each of the European countries. We'd choose one each month, and we would have a different one each month, and we would all come together with all of our different European nationalities. And honestly, I could have written a book about this topic, because the stereotyping, and I put myself into that. I am typically British. I am British, and I'm proud of being British and stuff. And when I came together with my German colleague and with my French colleague and the Spanish and the Italian colleagues, they were very, very different to me when you looked at it at a very granular level. And you could see these cultural stereotypes coming through. And I knew that I was conveying exactly the same from the British perspective. And I think one of the key things here is about that slide that I showed you. I can't remember exactly which number it was, but where I said, think of this as a continuous journey of being open-minded. Because the more you show interest in the subtleties of their, the way they use different times of the day differently to your culture or your background, the way that they negotiate, the way that they present, these are all different little stars. And some of this stuff can be very, very subtle, but different ways of communicating that you can learn. And then you've got a choice. I'm not going to say you then have to do it on their terms. You might want to do it in the way that you do it, because that in itself adds value to them. But I think it's about being kind of friendly, kind of exploratory, should we say. So you're going to explore those differences. And some of those things might be great things that you can then take on board and use yourself. Some of those things you might look and think, I could never do that, and I'd never want to do that. But it's interesting because now I've experienced it and learned it. So being thirsty and hungry for these differences, I think, is a core kind of mindset to take.
Brilliant, thank you. Just wanted to finish on a really nice comment from Stephen, who said, this webinar was fantastic, really worthwhile and enjoyable. Thanks very much. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great.